Our next panel will continue with the future, new mobility trends. I want to call our moderator, Eyal Rosner, partner at Beyond Mobility, and we'll be joining with Eran Shir, CEO of Nexar, Tal Ater, CTO and founder of Dove, Liad Itzhak, VP Head of Mobility, Here Mobility, and Keren Fanan, VP Global Head of Ventures at Gett.
Hi everyone. You should start with the lady. Okay. So you've done the introduction, so I can skip that and move to the questions. We just hear a very knowledgeable person with a kind of a 20,000 feet view. What we like to do now is speak to the people who actually engage on a day-to-day with the current situation and what they feel is missing. So I will start from right to left, and Eran, maybe you tell us what you think is missing in the future of mobility.
I think that when we think about mobility today and autonomous vehicles and everything related to that, we're a bit fixated with a very specific problem, which is how do we take a single vehicle from point A to point B without killing anyone, right? And that's obviously a problem that is interesting to solve. I think there are two other problems that I would consider equal or even more valuable and interesting. One is, how do we actually add safety to our current system quickly? And how do we optimize for safety? I think that we are all really excited about this future of autonomous vehicles, because we all think about this as in the terms of the jet zone. We all think about it in the terms of, I don't have to look for parking anymore, I don't have to drive anymore. There's all these kind of fun things that are going to happen, and they will happen eventually, but it's going to take a while. And in the meantime, there's a lot that we can do with all of this amazing technology that people are building to actually get rid of car collisions tomorrow. And I think that is something that we don't pay, in my humble opinion, enough attention. And the way to see it is to look at the graphs. And you see that as we talk more and more about autonomous vehicle and mobility as a service and all this kind of thing, actually the number of casualties and fatalities grows year over year. We're now back to 11 years past. I think the second point, which is related to it, we need to start thinking about this as a system. Okay? We need to start thinking about the situation where we'll have 10,000 autonomous vehicles in various levels of autonomy, some of them going in as shuttles, some of them going as part of a shared service, some of them are private, driving amongst a sea of human-driven vehicles, and how do we manage all of this together as a system? And I think we pay little less attention to that in the discourse today.
Okay. I'll go to the other side. Keren, you know, one of the things that bothers me at least is the fact that since autonomous becomes so cheap and easy to access, you know, when you take price of any product by 80% or so, then obviously demand goes up dramatically. So we will eventually end up, you know, stuck in a different type of traffic jam. And obviously the question is how you actually solve this issue of, you know, the sharing type business that basically will result, the technology will result.
Yeah, so the future of autonomous vehicles is going to change the entire perception of car ownership. The one car per one person concept is going to change. I mean, if we're going to have one autonomous vehicle per one person in the future, then we've done nothing to improve. So the ambitious goal is eventually that we will not own the vehicle, but we will share the vehicles. And everything will be able under one single platform. So we will be able to book a car and get to our destination if we want. We will be able to share a ride and get to our destination if we want. And we will be able to book a logistics need if we want, all under one single platform being operated with autonomous vehicles. At Gett, what we're trying to do is to start this journey towards autonomous vehicles already today by encouraging people to leave their cars at home and use other advanced mobility solutions already today. So when the day autonomous vehicle comes, we are already ready for them, right? So, for example, one of the solutions that we recently developed is a product called Get Together. Get Together is our mass transit solution. It is a hybrid model of on-demand shuttles along fixed routes with flexible stops. And we basically encourage people to share their ride on their daily commute and not to come with their vehicles every day to work. We believe that solutions like Get Together are also the first to turn to autonomous, right? So these fixed routes with flexible stops are their first solutions that will be replaced with autonomous vehicles because it is well-defined, geo-mapped, and very easy to control. So for sure, the autonomous future means that we will share these vehicles and not own them.
Okay. Liad, I think you offer, Liad is representing Here Mobility. He built Here Mobility. And you offer something which is a bit different type of model. Will you elaborate?
Well, of course. When you ask, I think beforehand, what is the missing part of mobility? And I think that Scott, just before this session, rightfully said, the mobility brings a lot of promise to everyone to move around freely, more cheaper, reduce congestion. It is a big promise for the consumer. It is a big promise for the environment. It is a big promise for cities that need to solve congestion. Now, something really not quite going in this direction today. What we see is that this market is very concentrated market, the mobility market, with very few players. Now, in order to have this vision, this future of moving around freely, you need to have a diversity of mobility providers. You need to have an ecosystem that encourage competitiveness, that encourage different mobility providers, so people will be able to take a journey with intermodal, with different service providers, hop on and off from different services. And then you can then take this ecosystem when it is a healthy ecosystem, and then you can start optimize it. You can start think about how people are really moving around, thinking about behavioral science and thinking how can you influence this ecosystem. So this is what we're now building in Here Mobility. We built a marketplace. It's like an exchange. It's like a stock market. We invite every supplier, every mobility service provider to join in and provide their goods, which in this case is going from point A to point B, and make it available worldwide to everyone that want to consume these services. By doing that, we bring together all the different players in the market and creating a market.
Okay. Tal, I think you guys have an interesting model to hear about, so maybe a few words.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Liad is saying. I mean, if you want to reduce congestion and improve the efficiency of transportation, you need to have an open system where different mobility companies can work together so that when you're trying to get from point A to B, you're not just limited to the services provided by one silo, but you have access to all of the mobility services. So at DAV, we're taking an open approach to the same problem, the same issue, allowing anyone to access any kind of service, no matter which provider it comes from.
Interesting. I guess, when you work in this ecosystem, obviously there's the cities, there's the government to handle. And of course, they will have major impact on the future. So I'll be happy to hear your thoughts from your experience, from your discussions with cities, with municipalities, how they seize the future in that respect. Maybe, Keren, you will start?
So, of course, municipalities is a major part of the entire ecosystem of autonomous vehicles and the future of transportation, because they basically define the rules and also control subsidies and incentives that will encourage us as a public to use this type of services. From our experience with our existing mobility solutions, we actually see great engagement coming from local municipalities. For example, in Israel, we currently operate our on-demand shuttle solution for businesses, and we are also working on a partnership, for example, with Tel Aviv municipalities, to encourage people to park their vehicles outside of crowded business centers, like we have here in Ramat HaChayal, and basically enter that center only with shared advanced mobility solution. So they're actually allocating free parking slot to encourage people not to use their car when coming to that area. And I think that's just one example of many things that municipalities will take part in and will encourage these new solutions.
Maybe to add something to
Sure,
this
go ahead.
discussion. Cities, I think that there's a buzzword, cities want to become smart cities. And in order to become smart, you need to have an access to the data. But right now, when cities try to analyze their problems, their transportation problems, they see it in a very high level. They see the traffic, they see the congestion, they see how the roads are blocked. And it's like, diagnosing people that someone that is sick, and you measure his heat, and that's it. And you don't really know how to diagnose what is the actual problem. But what cities actually need is, and again, referring to what Scott just mentioned a few minutes ago, they need to understand how people are actually moving around the city, how people are moving from point A to point B to point C, with which transportation modes, and then they can try and start to influence the people to move around differently. But if they don't have this access to the data, they won't be able to do that. But right now, they don't have the access for the data, and what we can do with the marketplace is to give this access, because in the marketplace, we already connect to all the different mobility services within a city. And then we create a single API outside, and a city can leverage it, and then can start analyzing what is really going on. Then they can do take some actions in real time and measure in real time what is the outcome of their action. They don't need to take an action like, I don't know, adding an extra fee per taxi ride like New York just did, and taking a $2.5 extra per ride. And then a year later, they will measure what was the outcome of this movement. No, they need in real time to understand, they need in real time to give solutions. And the only way to do that is to connect to all the different mobility services in a city.
Okay. Eran, it seems like...
Yeah, I definitely agree with Liad. From our experience working with cities, mainly in the US, the dynamics is very interesting. The cities are interested in the data. They want to implement these use cases. They, just to give an example, for one major metropolitan that we work with, and they are interested in things like understanding where people do double parking and how does that impact congestion, and what kind of rules they need to enforce in each block of the city square, of the city metric to streamline traffic. They want to understand what is the impact of construction work, and those little orange cones, and all of these kind of different dynamics. They are pretty sophisticated in their needs and in their requirements today, or they have kind of, we say in Hebrew, big eyes. The challenge is that they are, at the end of the day, cities. And cities have this infrastructure and that sometimes kind of prevents them from moving fast. But I want to say one important thing. I think that cities, at the end of the day, and government will play a key role, actually a huge role, in actually trying to solve the problem of mobility. Because fundamentally, and I really connect to what you said earlier, fundamentally, what all of us, or many of us here and in other places that are focused on the future of mobility are doing, is we're increasing the size of the problem, we're not diminishing the problem. And the reason we're increasing the size of the problem, we're increasing congestion, we're increasing demand for the product. It's very simple, you know, it's, in economic terms, it's extremely simple. You create a better product, there'll be an increased demand.
Cheaper also.
Cheaper. And because of that, the externalities will grow. And I always do this kind of fun exercise, a fun question. I ask myself, I'm happy for all of you to ask yourself, you know, today, many of you own a car. When it's expensive, you have to drive, you have to take it to the garage. When a collision happens, you have to deal with it. There's insurance costs, there's all this kind of stuff, right? And now people promise us, we're going to produce a car that you don't have to drive, doesn't get into collisions, will go to the garage on its own, will find parking on its own, and then you want to buy less of it. It's totally, and it will be cheaper, right? Electric and cheaper. You're going to want to buy one in every color for every day of the week, right? To give to each one of your kids. And I think that this is going to be an increasing problem. We'll see that the dissonance between the future that we believe that we're creating, which is this beautiful future with no congestion, etc., and the future that we're actually creating, that dissonance will continue to grow. And the only people that can actually solve it is the government, is the cities, is by actually capturing those externalities, by enforcing taxes. I think in that sense, Israel is one of the most innovative countries in the world. You know of course, you know, that Israel is piloting, and now going out to even a bigger program of convincing people not to go through the highway or the main arteries in rush hour.
Paying them for that, basically.
Paying them, actually, incentivizing them. The same thing goes with insurance companies. Insurance companies have a huge stake in this game because they sit on a pile of money connected to safety. So they can incentivize people to be safer, to drive smoother, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that we sometimes look under the lamp at the cool technologies, or in fact, the people that can actually save us, the people that hold the incentives in their hands.
Tal?
Yeah, I don't think it takes a math genius to understand that if more and more people are moving into the city, then the current situation can scale, and it's not, it can scale that way. And also the current solutions won't work, so that's why it's so critical for legislators and cities to lead the legislation and lead the direction of advancement. And it's also really important for companies, commercial companies, to work hand in hand with them. The old model of asking for forgiveness rather than permission won't work in transportation. You have to work hand in hand. And from talking with people who are in government and legislation and FAA, people who we work with daily, the legislators are a lot of time working in a bubble. So they need to work hand in hand with the technology company. There needs to be an open discussion. And I believe an approach of having an open consortium that brings together different industry leaders and legislators together to discuss this is really important, and one of the things we're trying to lead.
Keren, you had something to add?
Yeah, I wanted to add that I believe that it is true that today people own a car, and we love our cars and we buy more cars. And yeah, potentially when an autonomous vehicle will come and they are better, we will want to buy them. But I don't think the solution should be only forcing people to leave their car at home. The solution should come by developing alternatives. If we will have proper alternatives that are as convenient, as transparent, as easy to use as our private vehicle, then we will decide to leave our car at home. So I think that our focus should be about creating these alternatives, about creating these advanced new technologies to engage people to leave their car at home and not only expect municipalities to charge extra taxes for people that use their cars. And again, The journey, in our mind, starts today, right? Autonomous vehicle, it's the end goal when we replace the car that we share today in an autonomous vehicles. But already today, we should start this mindset change of sharing a ride, of improving the seat mile utilization, not just the car utilization, and about, again, leaving our cars at home.
Yeah, but in the end of the day, it's a chicken and egg problem, right? I mean, if you don't have infrastructure altogether, let's take Europe versus Israel or the US, okay? European countries are much more, let's say, socialized in the way they treat transportation. They offer much more public transportation, which are much more accessible, so people use that, right? Whilst Israel or the US are, I'd say, less so. So people, if they have a good solution, now good solutions have to come with some help, externalities, help from government, cities, whatever.
But the thing is that if you try to optimize a single service, it's not necessarily, even on the contrary, it doesn't solve the entire ecosystem problem. It doesn't. Each one try to maximize their own profit, even if they give for a single user a better service. For example, if you look at the ecosystem, it adds more congestion, it adds more, it can add more problems. And I want to refer to what Eran mentioned about how key are government and how key are municipalities in this play. They need to take this level of control over the ecosystem. And I want to talk about something that is very, very boring, in your permission, standardization. Just to give an example how standardization is so important, the one single thing that helped to drive world trade the way that we know it right now is determine what will be the size of a single container. That is very important. It helped to build the same size of the ships, the rails, trucks, all the infrastructure around it, and then it boosts up the whole world trade. Now in the mobility, we don't have standardization. And we see that each mobility service provider has its own standard. Taxis, even if you look only at taxis, each one has its own dispatch system, its own API. Some of them doesn't have an API. So a city is, or a municipality or a controller is really blocked from accessing these services and to gain this level of control. And the lack of standardization is a key element of how this environment that we all wish that will evolve doesn't. And there are many initiatives right now to start to trying and build this, I would call it the HTTP for mobility, but adoption of this kind of protocol will take forever in terms of the fastness of how things are moving right now. And I think that we can help a lot with what we're building right now, because in the marketplace we already connect to all the different mobility services. By doing that, we as a side effect, nice side effect, but as a side effect, we're creating a standard in the market or a way to connect to all the mobility services, because we're very open and everyone can access to it through APIs, through SDKs, through many different other ways. It gives the level of control to cities to regain control over the ecosystem.
Just to mention one point, there's about 800, 900 startups in Israel. I guess there's a couple of thousands outside of Israel around mobility. Just try to count how many of them actually deal with the optimization of A to B. Mm-hmm. None, almost. Mm-hmm. And that's basically reflect what you're saying, that everybody is optimizing his own route, but doesn't actually optimize the
But it's not only optimizing route, it's actually building an ecosystem, building the system of systems in the mobility, and give this control not to a private company, but to the government, but to a city. And I think that's key to build the future that we want, that we all share, I think, the same vision that we want to see for mobility.
Tal, you had something to add?
Yeah, so I actually sit on one of those standards body, and I was in one of those meetings a few weeks ago in Munich, and I can attest that it is very boring. But once something actually happens, it's really miraculous the kind of effect it can have. And I completely agree with how standardization and allowing different vehicles and different services from different companies to work together can really transform the industry. Because once, I mean, let's say Tesla. Tesla owners have range anxiety, so Tesla has to build superchargers everywhere. But once you allow Tesla owners to make use of any network that is out there and letting any truck use any drone that is out there to do last mile delivery, or letting even the container, let the container contact rovers that will take things out of it. Once you allow that, you can dramatically reduce the cost for logistics, for freight, and that is something that can have an amazing impact on not just transportation, but the entire world. And I think the catalyst for that is having standards that allow different companies to work together using the same common language.
Eran?
I want to encourage ourselves to think about second-order derivatives, second-order effects, and about the psychology of people, and think about the world rather than how it should be, think about how it would be. Because I'll give you a couple of examples of second-order effects. One of them is good, the other one less so. If we had autonomous vehicles, the immediate effect of it is that I'll be willing to commute further. I'll be willing to live further because I can sleep on my way to work, or I can walk, or I can do stuff, right? That means that the commute radius of an urban area grows larger. And you get more congestion, you get more people coming in to the city every day. On the other hand, if we manage to deploy autonomous vehicles to a level that will actually improve safety, that will actually increase my incentive to take a bike, because I'm less scared about being hit by a vehicle, right? So that actually will influence.
As long as you live close to the city.
Within the city, right? Let's say within the city, not on the highway. But taking a bicycle or a scooter or electric bikes like we do in Tel Aviv, and it's a bit crazy today, as you know, doing it, in an environment where collisions are a thing of the past or are a rare thing, you'd be more willing to do it. And that way you'll decrease congestion. At the end of the day, the psychology of people is what will determine, not our technology. If we introduce a great mobility service, a cheap mobility service in New York City, for example, one of the unintended consequences will be that everyone that are now riding the subway will say, I prefer to take a cab, right? I prefer to sit, like in a fundy, nice, with the AC, and not get stuck in the thing. And these effects will actually control our lives, not what we hope and wish to happen.
That goes back to the tax and why municipalities.
Exactly. At the end of the day, if you think about it, congestion is a tax that we pay on our productivity.
On our time.
Yeah.
Do you see any risks to this? Phenomena, to these trends in terms of the sharing trends, or do you see major risks that can jeopardize the whole trend?
The way I see it, the main risk is us not adapting enough the shared transportation and the new models of transportation. And again, it is true that when sharing a cab or just ordering a cab is more convenient than using the subway, then more people will choose a cab. But that will also will force our existing public transportation solution to go to the next step. Because every time that we go further to the next step of innovation, of advanced solution, that customers' expectations are becoming higher, then the rest of the existing solutions have to kind of find a way to fit to the new standard?
I think that one of the biggest risks that we're facing is that the mobility market will be a very concentrated market. We see this trend. We see the market is not really evolving into a competitive market, but we see big players in this market already gaining a monopolistic position in this market. Worldwide, we see them actually divide the world between them. And eventually, if we will find ourselves in 2030, when this market, the mobility market, will be $1.5 trillion market, a concentrated market, we are in trouble. Because if we don't have the diversity as a starting point to build optimization on top of it, we won't be able to fight the game, we won't be able to optimize, and we will get stuck in a market that is dominated by very few players who determine how we will move around, instead of regaining control and giving cities the ability to optimize the ecosystem.
Tal, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I mean, I would. It's actually the exact same words I would use. I would say centralization is a major risk, because once everything is controlled by one party, then it serves their interest, their commercial interest, and not necessarily the interest of passengers. Having an open system where every single transportation player can participate in equally, not having whether it's data or drivers or passengers concentrated in the hands of one company, is going to really open opportunities, innovation, and allow other players to participate in this ecosystem.
Guys, we have 20 seconds if you'd like to finish.
I just want to add one thing.
15 seconds.
On risks. The biggest risk that I see is that we hype our message and we don't deliver, and the gap between the hype and the delivery is so big that people get disillusioned, and we get into a situation of a nuclear winter. And you know, the best example is Tesla. I really fear a situation where Tesla actually breaks down, and then that will have ripple effects that we all feel.
Guys, thank you very much.